My name is Bella Smith, and my childhood was steeped in the sounds of saws whirring and hammers striking nails, accompanied by the warm, earthy scent of freshly cut wood. My father, Henry Smith, was the proud owner of a small yet well-respected furniture business that had been in our family for generations. His hands, calloused from years of craftsmanship, brought life to raw timber, transforming it into exquisite pieces of furniture that graced the homes of many. My mother, Angela, while not a craftswoman herself, played an equally vital role. She managed the financials, maintained relationships with clients, and ensured that every order was handled with the utmost care. Growing up, I was surrounded by tales of our legacy. Hanging prominently in my father's workshop was an aged portrait of my grandfather, a silent guardian watching over our craft. My father often recounted the story of how his father and grandfather before him had built the business from scratch, their unwavering dedication laying the foundation for what we had today. As a child, I paid little mind to these stories, more preoccupied with school, friendships, and my own ambitions. Yet, as I matured, the weight of our family's history settled upon me, a silent yet ever-present responsibility whispering in my ear. By the time I entered my 20s, I began taking a more active role in the family business, spending my summers in the workshop, learning the intricacies of our trade. My hands, once accustomed to textbooks and computer keyboards, learned to appreciate the grain of fine oak and the smooth polish of finished mahogany. I still held dreams of forging my own path, perhaps a career in law or medicine, but the pull of my heritage was undeniable. It was around the time of my college graduation at 24 that I noticed a change at home. My father, usually a man of unwavering confidence, seemed troubled. He spent more time in his office, his forehead creased in worry, while my mother's usual warmth was tinged with an undercurrent of anxiety. The air in our house felt different, heavier. One evening, as we prepared dinner together, I finally confronted my mother about it. She hesitated, her hands stilling over the cutting board before she spoke. "Bella, things are changing," she admitted carefully. "The business is struggling." I stared at her, my heart sinking. She continued, explaining that a large, industrial furniture company had opened nearby, offering mass-produced, inexpensive alternatives to our handcrafted work. Our loyal clientele was dwindling, and for the first time in decades, the Smith family business was in real danger. A few days later, my father summoned me to his study, his voice uncharacteristically grave. As I entered, I was met with the piercing gaze of a man I had never seen before. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and exuded an air of authority. His expression was unreadable, his dark eyes assessing me with quiet intensity. "Bella, this is Mr. Lincoln Lopez," my father introduced him solemnly. Mr. Lopez offered me a curt nod, his presence filling the room with an unspoken gravity. Though I was dismissed shortly after, the tension that lingered in the study sent a clear message: something was happening, and it was big. Days passed, each one thick with whispered conversations and hushed phone calls. The uncertainty gnawed at me until, one rainy Tuesday evening, my parents called me into the living room for a discussion that would change my life forever. My father sat forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "Bella," he began, his voice strained, "we need to talk." I swallowed hard, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. "What is it?" I asked warily. "You remember Mr. Lopez?" he continued. "He owns the furniture factory I mentioned before." The mere mention of the factory sent a cold wave of unease through me. My mother, her eyes filled with silent sorrow, nodded. "He has made an offer," my father said, his words deliberate. "An arrangement of sorts." A strange sense of foreboding settled in my chest. "What kind of arrangement?" I asked cautiously. My father exhaled, his eyes searching mine. "He wants to arrange a marriage between you and his son." For a moment, I was sure I had misheard him. I let out a breathless, incredulous laugh. "I'm sorry, what?" "Bella, listen," my mother began, but I cut her off. "Are you serious? This isn't the 1800s. You can't just barter me off to some stranger like a business transaction." "No one is forcing you into anything," my father said quickly. "We just wanted to be honest with you. This is a way to secure our future." I stood abruptly, my mind a whirlwind of disbelief. "So, what? I marry some guy I've never met, and in return, Mr. Lopez agrees not to crush our family business?" I shook my head. "This is insane." My parents' faces were etched with pain and regret, but beneath it, I saw desperation. They had always been champions of my independence, but now, they were grasping for a solution to keep our legacy alive. I need time to think, I said finally, the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. For a week, I wrestled with the decision. It felt archaic, absurd even, yet the knowledge that our family's livelihood was at stake gnawed at me. Finally, I decided, before rejecting the idea outright, I would meet him, just a meeting, nothing more. The arranged meeting was set at a quiet, upscale cafe. As I entered, my heart pounded in anticipation. I scanned the room, my nerves jangling. "Bella," a voice called. I turned to see a young man about my age with tousled brown hair and a confident, yet warm, smile. "I'm David, David Lopez." He pulled out a chair for me, flashing an easy grin. "This is pretty weird, huh?" Despite myself, I chuckled. "You could say that again." Over coffee, we talked, and to my surprise, I found myself genuinely enjoying his company. He was funny, down to earth, and, shockingly, also reluctant about the entire situation. Our short meeting stretched into hours, and when we finally parted, I realized I wasn't as opposed to seeing him again as I had initially thought. Over the following weeks, David and I continued to meet. We talked about everything, our dreams, our families, the absurdity of our situation. He took me to hidden gem restaurants, introduced me to music I had never heard before, and made me laugh in a way I hadn't in a long time. Slowly, something shifted between us. One evening, as we walked along the river, he turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, "I think our parents might have been onto something after all." I glanced at him, my heart thudding in my chest. "Oh, and why's that?" He smiled, a mixture of nervousness and sincerity in his eyes. "Because I think I might be falling for you." Warmth spread through me, and in that moment, I realized, I felt the same way. Perhaps, against all odds, this arrangement wasn't so impossible after all. I confronted David in our living room, my heart pounding with frustration and disbelief. The tension between us had been growing for weeks, but tonight, I could no longer hold back. "What is going on with you?" I demanded, crossing my arms tightly. "This job was supposed to be your lifeline, yet you're treating it like a burden. Do you even care anymore?" David leaned back against the couch, his expression unreadable, but when he laughed, the sound was hollow, almost cruel. "A lifeline? Don't make me laugh. I'm just waiting for my chance to get out of here." His words sent a chill through me. "Get out? What do you mean?" He met my eyes, his gaze as cold as ice. "Once my mother passes away, I'm selling everything, then, I'm leaving." The air seemed to be sucked from the room. "How can you be so heartless?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "She's your mother." His jaw tightened, and for the first time, there was no pretense of warmth in his expression. "She's a burden," he spat, "and this job, this so-called second chance your father gave me, it's beneath me. I was a CEO, Bella, not some errand boy." Anger flared within me, a fire I could no longer contain. "You ungrateful jerk. My father gave you a chance when you were at your lowest, when no one else would, and this is how you repay him. You sit here and complain while I take care of everything, while I hold everything together, and you just wallow in your own self-pity." I couldn't bear to look at him any longer. Turning on my heel, I stormed out of the room, my vision blurred with unshed tears. As I stepped into the hallway, I nearly collided with Sienna. She had heard everything. The sadness in her eyes mirrored the ache in my heart. Without a word, she reached out and took my hand, a silent gesture of comfort. I squeezed her hand back, grateful for her presence in that moment of despair. Days passed, and the tension between David and me remained thick and suffocating. Then, one gray Tuesday morning, my world shattered. A police officer arrived at my doorstep, his expression grim. The words that followed barely registered in my mind. My parents were gone. A fatal car crash had taken them both in an instant. I moved through the funeral preparations like a ghost, numb and disconnected from reality. People came and went, offering condolences that barely reached me, but one person never showed up. David. Not once did he offer a word of comfort. Not once did he stand by my side as I mourned the people who had given me life. Instead, he remained distant, detached, as if none of it mattered to him at all. As I watched my parents' caskets being lowered into the earth, sorrow and anger warred within me. David's indifference cut deeper than I thought possible. After the funeral, I made a call. "Is David at the office?" I asked our company secretary. There was a hesitation on the other end. Yes, he's in your father's office. My hands clenched into fists. Without a second thought, still dressed in my funeral attire, I drove straight to the company. Bursting into my father's office, I found him lounging in the leather chair, feet arrogantly propped on the desk. Rage boiled over. What the hell do you think you're doing? Get out of my father's chair now. David's expression was dismissive, his smirk infuriating. Your father's chair? I think you mean my chair. I struggled to remain calm. David, please, this isn't right. My father just died. He slammed his hand against the desk, making me flinch. Enough. I am sick of your moral lectures. Bella, you have been trying to change me since the day we married. Well, surprise, I never loved you. The only reason I married you was because my father forced me to. The weight of his words crushed me. I staggered back, reeling from the impact of his cruelty. He leaned forward, his smirk turning predatory. Oh, and you might find this interesting. This company, valued at about $42 million, I now control it as the deputy director. I stared at him in disbelief. You can't do that. He chuckled darkly. Oh, but I can. I have all the passwords and account access. I'm in charge now, Bella, and there's nothing you can do about it. To my horror, he turned to the computer and began transferring company funds to his personal account. Stop it. I lunged forward, but he shoved me away. A folder flew toward me, landing at my feet. Divorce papers. Your choice, he said coldly. Tears blurred my vision, but something inside me hardened. I would not let him win. Without a word, I left the office and drove straight to Mr. Asher, my father's lawyer and confidant. When he handed me an envelope, his expression was solemn. Your father anticipated this might happen, he said gently. Inside was my father's will and a letter. My hands trembled as I read it. My dearest Bella, if you are reading this, I am no longer here. I regret pushing you into this marriage and not seeing David for who he truly was. You deserved so much better. The company is yours now, make it thrive again. Please, divorce that worthless man, live your life and be happy. That's all I ever wanted for you. I love you always, Dad. A sob tore from my throat, but when I looked up at Mr. Asher, I knew what I had to do. File these divorce papers immediately, I said firmly. Returning home, I found Sienna in the living room, wrapped in a blanket. Sienna, I began gently, I'm leaving. David and I are divorcing. To my surprise, tears filled her eyes. Take me with you, Bella, please. Before I could answer, the door burst open. David stormed in, rage twisting his features. What did you do? The company accounts are locked. I stood my ground. The company isn't yours. My father left it to me, and I've signed the divorce papers. You have no claim to anything here. David's eyes flickered to Sienna, who was packing a small bag. Mom, what are you doing? She met his gaze with quiet strength. I'm going with Bella. For the first time, David was speechless. Then fury took over. Fine, get out. I don't need either of you. And so we left. 3 years later, Sienna passed away peacefully in my arms. At her will reading, David sat across from me, smug, until he heard the words that sealed his fate. I, Sienna Lopez, bequeath all my assets, including my house and savings, to Bella Smith. David's face turned pale. This is a joke. She must have manipulated my mother. His companion scoffed. Wait, you mean you don't have any money? With that, she walked out, leaving him behind, a broken man. Justice had been served. As I sat in my father's office, I glanced at the framed quote on my desk. The most difficult roads often lead to the most beautiful destinations. And I knew I had finally found mine.